I'd like to spend a little time talking about a question that is relatively new in the market. And I just read an article about this, and there's somebody that had a very specific opinion, and I'll get into that. But the topic is, should you add pronouns to your resume? Now, my name is Jason Roberts. I've been a recruiter for 25 years. It's been my job to help companies find people to fill their jobs. And now I'm turning the tables a bit. I'm spending my time helping candidates find jobs that fulfill them. Now, part of that is looking at today's trends, and specifically, I try to help with resumes and interviews and things that can help you to make your way and to navigate the recruiting landscape. Speaking of that, there's a link right below here for a free guide to updating your resume. My top 10 tips for getting your resume noticed. You can get that at execcongress.com/resume, or just follow the link below. But that said, what I want to talk about is, on your resume, should you add your pronouns, right? Now, this is a deeply personal issue, and people have very strong opinions one way or another about what's right and what's wrong and what you should be able to do and what you should not be able to do. And the perspective I'm going to come from is a person who is trying as hard as he can to help you navigate the corporate environment so that you get your next job, so that when you apply for that next job, you have the best possible chance of getting ahead of the competition, scoring that role, and moving forward in the process. With that in mind, I think that you're better off not adding your pronouns to your resume. Now, here's my reasoning for this. A lot of times when you apply for jobs, you're asked to voluntarily identify yourself. It's called a voluntary self-ID inside those systems. Now, when you do that, you're giving your gender, your ethnicity information, you're talking about your military service, disability status, things of that nature. All voluntary. You don't have to do that. Nobody's making you do that. But if you do, the companies who receive that information go to incredibly great lengths to make sure that the recruiters can't see it, and the hiring managers can't see it, and the interviewers can't see it. No one can see your voluntary self-ID information because that's protected. Now, why is that protected? It is protected to try to avoid any bias that may enter into the process. We want to keep you from experiencing bias in the recruiting process at all costs. Now, adding your pronouns inserts bias on your own. One of the key things that we're asking is gender. When you're adding a pronoun, one of the things that you're saying is, this is my gender. When you do this, you're inserting your own bias, and you do so at your own peril. What we're trying to do is make it where recruiters, hiring managers, interviewers, the only decision criteria that they're using is, can this person do the job? Do we think they have the experience? Do they have the education? Do they have the background? These are factual representations. We're trying to uncover more and more information throughout the interview process. If you add any other piece of information that we may subconsciously add as a bias, it actually is a dangerous situation for the employer, but it's really problematic for you, because you don't want to have bias against you either. Nobody wants this. So I would keep the pronouns off. But you say, what if I'm misgendered in the recruiting process? What I'll say is, I think you have very little likelihood of that. Now, it may be that this happens, but the most common pronoun that ought to be used in the interview process is you. We should talk about each other in second person and in first person when we're having a direct one-on-one conversation. It's very weird to talk about a person in third person in their presence. So I'm not sure that it helps you very much. Now, the places where I could see a misgendering happening, if you go into an interview and someone says, oh, let me show you where the ladies' room. They're making an assumption about your gender. They think that you need to go to the ladies' room. So that's a place where it could show up. I'm not sure adding your pronoun to your resume helps with that, but that's a place where it could enter in. But the biases that can show up are numerous, right? The article that I just read, it was an MSNBC article, and specifically what had happened is someone had added their they them pronouns. and they said they have had far fewer interviews once they added their they them pronouns. And I would expect that's probably right because they inserted this bias. And I know that there are absolutely hiring managers and recruiters who are uncomfortable with pronouns today. That absolutely happens. Now, I don't think they would purposely say, oh, this person's automatically out. But what may happen is subconsciously they would have this discomfort, this level of, I'm not sure what to do. What if I say the wrong thing? And they may avoid that person. It's not the right thing for them to do, mind you, but that might subconsciously happen. I think that probably was the case for this individual in the MSNBC article. I think that probably happened to them, and we don't want it to happen to them. That's really a tragedy. We want you to have every possible chance of getting that job. Here's the next question, Jason. Should I not complete that voluntary self-ID? I think that's probably safe. The company itself, they collect that information for two reasons. One, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance tells us that we have to do that in order to be compliant with our federal contracts. We have to know about the candidates who are applying and making it through. Legally, we ultimately have to ask. That information is useful in measuring affirmative action programs and diversity programs that the company also has in place and that are necessary for their normal operations today. So this is very commonplace. It's very normal. They do this all the time. That's how the data is used. Recruiters, hiring managers, interviewers, they never have access to it. They never see it. There have been a couple of cases. One of the big banks got in a little bit of trouble with the way that they used it, but recruiters didn't have individual access. What they did was they got a report back that said you had a diverse slate or you did not have a diverse slate. And if they did not have a diverse slate, they avoided going to offers and they added more interviews until they had a diverse slate and could move forward. They did that in order to be more inclusive ultimately, but in real life it wasn't. They were fined as a result. So that was one of the banks that got dinged for that. That being said, those recruiters still couldn't see individual gender, ethnicity, disability, military background. None of that was visible whatsoever. So you're safe. You're safe to enter that information. You're absolutely fine. Your pronouns, you're inserting your own biases. So if you choose to go that route, it's absolutely okay. Now, it may be that you are so impacted by being misgendered that you have got to put it on there. And you may want to use this as a mechanism to weed out some of the potential employers. You may say, I don't want to work in a place that isn't comfortable with me. So I'm going to put it right out there. And if they don't want to talk to me, then that's fine. Perfect. It's doing exactly the job that you need. Let that happen. But if you're in a place where you just need the job and there's a job you really want, there's a company you really want to work for, you want that sort of pedigree on your resume of working at this really well thought of company, and that's more important to you than the misgendering risk, then I would leave it off. I would leave it off if I were you. If it's way more important to use that as a screening criteria. And in fact, that's what the person in the article said, is that they were successful in screening out people who were uncomfortable with who they were. And that's probably true. They probably did a good job of doing that, even if they were working through the subconscious biases that people may have had. All of that said, it's always your decision. You get to do what you want to do. I do think it decreases your chance of getting to an interview if you add pronouns to your resume. I don't think that's right, but I think that's the way it is. I think it does decrease your chance. What it does do is it increases your chance of understanding where the company that you're interviewing with stands and having a higher likelihood that they will respect that pronoun once you get there. It's up to you to make the decision. You ultimately have to make the call as a person who's really trying hard to get you that next job, to help you find a better thing to move on to. I would encourage you to take caution when adding pronouns to resumes.